Hello and welcome to this second webinar about open access journals editorial processes. We are running this webinar together with AJOL, ASSAf, DOAJ, EIFL, LIBSENSE and UCT. And today we have Susan Waltzman and Louise van Heerden from ASSAf and Susan Murray from AJOL, who will talk about editorial processes in open access journals, peer review, editorial quality, editorial boards, routinely screening article submissions for plagiarism, and also about journal publishing practices and standards framework and evaluations. Like I said, unfortunately, it will be English only, but we will share slides with you in English and in French. So very happy to see you here today, and over to you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Irina. Good morning to everybody out there. I'm looking at the numbers, still registering, and it's absolutely amazing. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Yes, you've got two Susans here, and if you now really want to get confused, go for it. We are two Susans, and we do call each other a little bit differently. The one is Sue, the other one is Susan, just to at least distinguish between the two of us. But I'm extremely grateful to co-present with Susan Murray and with Louise van Heerden. And with Irina as a chairperson, because we have been 4 kids on the block for a very, very long time in terms of open access and nowadays open science. So thank you very much for this opportunity. We have done quite a number of work in this regard, and just to bring it all together and to show participants what is it that we're actually talking about. There you go. And I do, Irina, I think my presentation is fine. It's
yes,
viewable
perfect.
by all. Wonderful. Right. So let's start. So we were asked to talk about the guidelines to I'm calling it to best editorial practices, because it is all about the editorial processes that we have to follow. So this is pretty much a presentation that will focus on the do's and the don'ts. So please bear with me. There's actually no other way that we can tell you the do's and the don'ts, and this is in the approach that we have to follow. I think what is very important is that I know that sometimes you would ask, then why is it important that we actually follow good editorial practices? And there are many, and there are plenty. And especially us in the developing world, we are really faced with a lot of criticism from the North, and also from the States. It's actually quite an uncomfortable situation, because they really frown upon our journals and say that, well, our quality, our credibility is really not up to that, or up to standard. So we have to find a way in how we actually project and show people that this is serious business for us, and we do follow the best practices in editorial practices as such. So we, especially in the South, especially in Africa, we have to improve every aspect of a scientific journal. It doesn't matter how small it is, but whatever you project via the web to the outside world, you've got to make sure that it's of a particular quality, and that you do follow due processes, and you've got to hang it out there and put it out there specifically on your website as to what are your processes that you follow. So to stimulate and develop a collection of scientific journals, we have to follow these quality standards that we were presenting this morning. There's a very important other part as well, and that is that academic publishing also occurs in an environment of powerful intellectual, financial, and sometimes political interests. And especially if we look at South Africa, there's a very strong framework in which we work in, and that is that we are funded by government, that our journals are the vehicles for funding for our institutions. It has a political slant to it. And yes, of course, then intellectual, is it of particular quality? So good decisions and strong editorial practices are necessary to manage these interests that will foster a sustainable and efficient publishing system. So good publication practices do not develop by chance and will become established only if they are actively promote it. And I think that's what we do. The code of best practices that you will hear from both Sue, Louise, and myself, it has come a long way. It's international followed practices. So it's not South Africa saying A, B, or C, or it's that country saying that, or it's Africa saying that. This is really based on international standards, and we should really pay attention to it. So just for clarification, what is a code of best practice? So code of best practice is a procedure. It's very procedural that has been shown by research and experience to produce optimal results, and that is established or proposed as a standard suitable for widespread adoption. And that's why we're advocating for widespread adoption, is that we are sort of recognized internationally in terms of the standards that we actually follow. So I really want to deep dive into all the do's and the don'ts, so to speak. And I just want to share, perhaps just start off and kick off with a couple of tips maybe. And they could be either for authors or for peer reviewers. So we must bear in mind, if we publish a particular article, it must be original. It must not be published elsewhere. And this is a very important point, and I will elaborate a little bit further. Why not elsewhere? It must be the first and the last place of where it's actually been primarily published. Publish agreements, and this is where it is extremely important. One should actually have a publisher agreement between yourself and the author in place to ensure that this particular article or publication is not under consideration by any other publication, and that it will not submit to any other journal until a final rejection decision. I think this is very important. And I can perhaps relay a story, what happened to our journal in South African Journal of Science. As soon as we published it, one article, we actually had a co-author coming back and say, but I did not give you permission. You gave you permission that you can publish this under my name as well as a co-author. So you see, you do let yourself out for quite a lot of problems if you don't have any publisher agreement in place. And if you're ever interested, we have agreement that we're happy to share. We work in an open environment, and this agreement has been drawn up by an attorney, an intellectual property rights attorney. It's very basic, but at least you do sort of cover yourself should you run into problems, and just to ensure that the author of that article does not publish, or in the meantime do something with the article which compromises the article in your workflow, etc. Very important, the manuscripts must contain detail of the methods and materials used of the study, and that's becoming more and more important, and this is specifically for peer reviewers, to ensure that the article has a good layout in terms of the methods that was followed, as well as the materials. Also, any data pertaining to a particular article is also very important to include that with the publishing of the article. So this is quite something new, and journals and editors will have to think very clearly and how they're going to include it specifically, or especially when these data is actually in data repositories. But there are ways that you can actually just refer to the data set that accompanies a particular article. But just to bear in mind that this is also very important. A very important tip is that self-citation must be limited. Sometimes it's inevitable, but it needs to be limited. Reference to be made to the first report of findings, especially if there's a second or the third, or there's reference to a particular article. It's best to refer to the article that the first one that was published. So no salami slicing. This is a very bad habit, and this happens quite frequently and oftenly. Articles should not be broken up into a series of publications. It should rather be published in one article, but salami slicing is perceived as very bad in terms of the Code of Best Practices. We do emphasize a lot about the editorial policy, and maybe Sue can perhaps mention she has more perhaps experience in a wider range of journals than we do. But if we allow journals to any of our platforms, this is a very important point that they get evaluated on. whether they do have an editorial policy in place. And with this policy, you signal to your authors and to your readers, what is it that you stand for? How would you deal with things? And if there's any conflict of interest, or whether there has been plagiarism, how would you actually act upon those? But just a few pointers to show what is that you have to look at. So the aim of the journal is very important, as well as the fields that will be covered by the journal. And these two aspects are sometimes not so clear in journals, and that actually leads to a journal that addresses almost nothing. It's not relevant and not very applicable in that particular field. So one must be very clear as to what will you cover in your journal. That's very important for author as well, to understand whether I will actually submit a manuscript to your journal or not. So you also have to be clear what kinds of articles will you be accepting for publication. Some journals just have research articles, but there are many other journals that also considers book reviews, obituaries, correspondence, or comments to the editor, etc. But say that to your author, say that to the person who wants to submit to your journal. There's an absolute need for originality and not being considered for publication simultaneously elsewhere. And that's what I've said in my introductory. This is a very important point, is what is the contract between you and the author? Be clear about the technical specifications as to the submission of the materials. Do you need the article in a Word format? Do you need all the data in the Excel format? Do you need original photographs of a particular resolution? Be clear, because otherwise you do add up a lot of administrative schlep when actually submitting or actually in the improvement phases of the actual article. So use of referees and editorial discretion. How do you use referees? What do you do as an editor? Be clear about, for instance, if you want to publish your own articles in your own journal, be clear as to how you will deal with it, that you will not be involved in the evaluation process, that you will send it for external, independent peer reviewers to evaluate your article. But again, but I will speak about this a little bit later, about the editorial participation in publishing, etc. So possible charges, if there are any charges, specifically some journals do ask article processing charges. So share with them as much as you can. Why do you need this money? What will it be used for? How much is it, etc. It does clear out a lot of things and questions and so on. But there's not just only the editorial policy. Please note that there's a whole suite of policies that should actually be on your website. Conflict of interest, confidentiality, ethical issues like plagiarism, corrections, when do you do them, how would you do them, copyright and licensing, advertising, preprints, peer review policies, etc. You can see there's a whole suite of them. If you actually look at journals, you will find some very good examples of these policies as such. I want to pause a little bit now at the editorial processes, the actual processes, and that is that scholarship should be open to multiple institutions. And this is a very important point, and this is sort of a practice that it's now quite heavily emphasized by international journals as well, meaning those from the north, etc. If you look at evaluation criteria, if you look at the Web of Science, if you look at Scopus, if you look at DOAJ, if you look at even AJOL, etc., it says, it's starting to say very specifically that you should open up to multiple institutions. It's a very important criteria internationally to actually adhere to. I've just completed a study where I've compared all the different evaluation criteria amongst different indexing services like Web of Science, Scopus, DOAJ, IBSS, Norwegian List, SciELO South Africa. And there's a common thread amongst these criteria, of which this is actually one of them. So consider submissions from the African continent, international authors, etc. It does signal a level of quality within your journal. What about editors and the editorial board members submitting to your own journal? I have started to allude to that one. Ideally not. Please don't do it, actually not. But if you do, you have to be very clear as to where the editorial discretion will be delegated to. You have to separate duties to ensure that the process is fair, objective, and relevant for the actual journal. So please remember this point. All the editorial office contact details must appear on the website, as well as other necessary information. If you have a website is a lovely tool to convey all the information to your availability, and just put it up there and be transparent and open as to how your journal is being managed. I think that's a very important point, because we live unfortunately on a continent where predatory practices and publishing is thrive, and we need to ensure that our journals are not classified under that group of journals. So whatever you can put up there, be transparent and ensure that your information is correct. It's horrible to visit a website and it's old and not updated information that you have access to. It gives a very bad impression to authors that want to submit to your journal. A journal must have an editorial board and or an editorial advisory board. What I find out there is that these two words and concepts are used interchangeably. And one must, as an editor, just make sure what is the role of that. If you have an editorial board, what is their role? What are their responsibilities? And if you have an editorial advisory board, what is their role? I find that the editorial board is sort of diminishing, meaning you do have your associate editors, etc., which really look at the technical aspects and sort of the workflow of the actual journal, and where some overarching decisions are being made. But the editorial advisory board is the board that looks at your journal and gives you strategic advice towards your journal, where you should be improved and where you shouldn't be improved. So just make sure when you name and when you set up your journal that you are clear as to what is the function. There used to be a practice where the editorial board would also review the different journals. We are saying no, you should, again, it's a segregation of duties. Your editorial board is there for a very specific purpose, but that your peer review should be removed from the functionalities of your editorial board. And it should be done by external, independent, we'll talk about the peer review a little bit later, double-blinded peer review. It just, again, contributes to the openness of your journal, and that it's a fair process and that quality is considered when making choices for the eventual articles to be published as such. So just a little bit about the editorial board. The editorial board plays an extremely valuable role in managing your journal and giving you advice and to work in a team with somebody which you can bounce your ideas and perhaps some challenges that a particular journal is facing. Ensure that your board members are actually qualified and experts in the field. They must be able to actually contribute and support the editor. That is important. That's their major role, is to support the editor in some decision makings, etc., and dealing with the different papers. They must lend prestige to a journal. It doesn't help just to appoint anybody. It is a prestigious process and a prestigious position to be part of. Rather consider mentorship. If you do want to actually look at young emerging researchers that should start to know the bells and the whistles of how to manage a journal and how to be an editor, rather consider mentorship. The composition of the board must be reviewed regularly. We recommend that both the editor and the board should just stay on for about 3 years, and then there should be a competitive process in which a new editor, or perhaps the renewal of the current editor for another 3 years, but not longer. This ensures that you stimulate the thinking within the journal, and it gives it an opportunity to perhaps revive itself or to bring in some new developments, etc. So this is quite important, is the term of both the editor as well as the editorial board and the editorial advisory board. Members must be given a clear indication of their role and duties. I've spoken about this. They also need to advise and support the editorial team. So the editorial team for me is that person that does the layout, the design, the advertisements, the upload on the actual web, make sure that you've got everything together. There's always such a person also in the team as such. Editorial board, again, occasionally review articles if it's in the field of expertise, occasionally, but it should be actually a sort of an independent process from the editorial board. And then they also have a very important role to do some marketing and outreach of the journal, to ensure that conferences or to make some webinar presentations on the journal, etc. But board members must also respect the confidential information of the journal. We deal with people, we deal with people's information, we deal with research that might be confidential or problematic or etc. And we really have an obligation there is to treat things confidential. And of course, to accept the editor's decision as final. That is important. Now we get to another important sort of pillar of the editorial processes, and that is peer review. This is still sort of the cornerstone of quality output. Our peer review system, we have to treat very carefully, insightful, and ensure that it's really independent, objective, and without any other tainting of the views, etc. The peer review policy must be published on its website, and how it is actually done. That is very important. And you've got to ensure that your whole team actually adheres to that workflow as such. Articles accepted for publication in the journal must be peer reviewed. At least 2 reviewers, double-blinded. The best way then to distinguish, if you want to, we call it in the South African Journal of Science, the front end and the back end. So the front end is a little bit more relaxed, if I can use that word. Maybe it's not the right word, although it does go through some very quick peer review just to make sure that we do adhere to at least some ethical principles in the front end. That will be the letter of the editor, letters to the editor, correspondence, book reviews, obituaries, etc. But then the back end is really the research articles, which needs to be peer reviewed. And be clear in your policies and on your platform what is being considered as peer reviewed and not. That is very important. You must select peer reviews very carefully. And I know if I say that, people just say, oh yeah, I know. Because peer reviewers are very reluctant and actually quite lethargic nowadays to peer review articles. And I know it's a humongous and a huge struggle for editors to find the appropriate reviewers. I just want to make you draw your attention to a database that we have, African Scientist Directory, which there are masses of people out there with you've got to have a PhD when you register on this directory, where people on this call can actually just browse a bit and see if that's not perhaps a nice tool to select new reviewers for particular manuscripts, etc. The reviewers should preferably be scholars who have not previously co-published with the author. So the author, I know sometimes we say, well, you tell me who must review your paper. That's not a very good practice, because again, there's a biasness into the review of a manuscript. Best to keep it away from the author to actually suggest. One has to be very careful if you start asking your author for reviewers, and then you have to think about the conflict of interest. And maybe that's a very big question to ask. What's the conflict of interest? But just want to highlight that particular point as such. Peer reviewers also must have the expertise and the competency in the field of the manuscript submitted. And I know that's quite a difficult thing to ensure, but it does make a difference if it's people or a reviewer from the field that reviews the article as such. So the reviewer must declare any potential of real conflict of interest before the review is submitted, and must be free of known bias in relation to the subject matter. So the whole issue of clearing the conflict of interest and to being upfront about the possible conflict of interest is also very important for peer review. So that this reflects on the workflow of the journal. Is at which point do you ask the peer review, do you have any conflict of interest, or are there anything out there that you would like to tell us before you review? Reviewer reports must be assessed by the editor to decide whether they, this is very important, I think this is more tips for the peer review. Reviewer is constitute the basis for the publication of the article in question, where the publication should follow if certain improvements are affected and or further work done and reported on. These are very important in the workflow and to be consistent in decision making about rejecting or accepting a manuscript. Whether a paper should be rejected, editors reserve the right to reject papers even without review. We call them desktop rejection. We have actually quite a couple of those in the SIJS, and our rejection rate is quite high. And it's because we have some stringent criteria in place. And if they do not fulfill those criteria, this rejection then would follow. In addition, studies that are fundamentally flawed may also be rejected without review. In both cases, editors must communicate the reason for a refusal clearly. And that is very important, is that feedback to your actual author to understand why, and perhaps to give the author an opportunity to better or to change the manuscript for resubmission to another journal as such. All peer review reports and substantive correspondence must be retained. This is very important because we do let ourselves, out there, we do hang ourselves out there for a lot of criticism, especially if there are comebacks and whether there's disputes and disagreement. These processes, it's very important to actually document these processes. And therefore, an online content management system like OJS, PKP is very important because it does allow you to retain all those records as such. Very important, peer reviewers are one of our important stakeholders when we're editors. So one must think about how do we incentivize them. There's not money to incentivize them, and that's quite a problematic practice out there. But we could publish their names at the end of each year to say thank you very much to all these peer reviewers who have actually contributed to this journal. So that's another way of incentivization. Just to be apparent and upfront about who does contribute to the system of knowledge as such. Editors should seriously consider not retaining reviewers who default on their obligations. I would really recommend from a practical point of view is just take them off. They're not adding value. You have pressure to publish on time, etc. So work with those people who really contribute to your field and to your journal as such. Peer review practice activities should be monitored regularly to ensure effectiveness, but also transparency and fairness, I would like to add. So what are the guidelines? Scrutinize the research methodology and results in terms of consistency, quality of interpretation, and likely reproducibility. So this is very specific for the peer reviewer when he peer reviews a particular manuscript. I'm happy for these slides to be shared afterwards. So if you're writing there like mad on the other side, please stop. You can have this so you can go back and check. Another guideline for the peer reviewer is identify gaps that could be explored to enhance the interpretability and strength of the findings, our insights. And one has to check whether that really actually happened and which are the gaps to ensure to highlight them. Suggest how the paper can be improved. That's very useful. If you write a manuscript or an article for a journal, it comes back with very, even if it's not accepted for publication, it gives you constructive criticism. It is very helpful for the author to actually know what needs to be done, etc. And I think then we will also lower the frustration levels of authors. They say, oh yeah, you know, we just send it and they just send it back and they say it has not been accepted. So I think we do have a responsibility also to our authors to be constructive in our criticism that we do give through to them. Assess the originality of the references. The reference list is extremely important when looking at a particular article. What references were used? How old were they? If they were very old, are those sort of the cornerstones of the particular subject field? Or are there more newly related materials that have been cited in the actual article? That gives you a very good idea of sort of the relevancy and the newness of the research being presented in the article. Contest conclusions when they are not justified by the results or arguments presented. That's also a very important element in evaluating the manuscript being submitted, whether it's just and whether it actually makes sense and it does tie into all the other methods and materials, etc., that has been used in the article in the uplead to the actual conclusion. So just a little bit on technical aspects, and this is also a practice that has come to the fore now. If your participants to altmetric, etc., and to crossref, you will see that these things are really becoming very important, because these are also points in which articles and journals are being indexed and acknowledged, and a broader picture actually of the world of research out there is being formed. And that is acknowledgement of funding resources. That's a field that specifically through crossref gets tagged through the metadata, so that funders can also see well and follow through with the funding that they've given to certain projects or authors, etc. Possible conflicts of interest must be stated. That's very important, and must again be on when you do your layout and design. That must be listed on the article. Author affiliations should be provided. The email address or contact details of the corresponding author should be provided. Very important in terms of your layout and design as well. Normally, priority is given to the date of acceptance of an article once the peer review has taken place, not from its dates of receipt, but preferably both dates. So the date of acceptance and sorry, let me just retract. So priority is given to the date of acceptance of an article and not from its date of receipt. But sometimes they do give both. When was it received and when was it approved for publication? Because that gives a clear indication to your author as to how quickly your turnaround time is in terms of acceptance and actual publication. That really shows your effectivity in terms of the workflow and the management of your journal as such. Retraction, that is actually quite a daunting exercise when you have to retract something. So you need to avail yourself as to what are the procedures. We're publishing in this wonderful world of electronically, but as soon as it's on the web, it really infiltrates each and every bit of the corner of the web. And now to extract and retract it from each and every corner is quite daunting. So avail yourself as to what needs to be done when you retract an article from the web as such. Not only on the website page, as well as on the PDF. There's some procedures in terms of the PDF as well. And then, of course, I want to encourage people to consider an online content management system. Again, that promotes openness, not perhaps not to the world out there, but definitely internally in your editorial team as to where are you, what are you doing. Should the editor become sick, anybody can go and have a look and see what's happening where and when. It really, that is the way to go. So I want to thank you, and I would like to hand over then to Louise van Heerden. Louise is responsible for SciELO. So what we're showing you this morning is two mechanisms within ASSAf's work that we do for editors, is how we support them, as well as sort of promoting quality and best practices. Thank you very much. Over to you. Thank you, Rina.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was excellent, very practical, very useful. And over to you, Louise.
Thank you so much, Irana, and also to all my colleagues and to everyone listening. Thank you very much for this opportunity to tell you about SciELO South Africa. It's a project within the scholarly publishing unit of the Academy of Science, and Susan and Veldsman and I work together. Yes, so specifically with regards to what Susanna said about a code of best practice for journals. I'm going to be elaborating on that a bit more specifically, what we expect in the SciELO South Africa collection. So we've referred to best practice, and specifically code of best practice. Susan has explained this, and I rather like this explanation or wording: a method or technique that has been generally accepted as superior to other alternatives because it produces results that are superior to those achieved by other means, or because it has become a standard way of doing things and are used to maintain quality and can be based on self-assessment or benchmarking. Yes, and that's very much what we do at ASSAf. And specifically within SciELO South Africa, we apply the code of best practice that Susan has referred to. And I'd like to tell you more about this collection we have in South Africa. So what does SciELO South Africa stand for? It stands for Scientific Electronic Library Online. And the journals are open access. And SciELO originated originally in Brazil. And there are now national collections in 15 countries that make up the SciELO network of journals. So that is just to give you an idea of the other countries, mostly South American, Portugal, and Spain as well. And then, of course, you'll see South Africa's flag there as well. So a bit more about this collection before I tell you about the criteria and best practice we follow. SciELO South Africa is a prestigious open access, meaning it's free to access, full-text searchable database of selected high-quality South African scholarly journals. And secondly, the SciELO South Africa focuses on strengthening the scholarly journal evaluation and accreditation systems in South Africa through the wide dissemination of excellent South African research through SciELO South Africa, and also by representing publishing best practice. So why do journals want to be included in SciELO? Well, it has a very good reputation. It adheres to strict standards and requirements, and in South Africa, and I see about a third of the attendees are from South Africa, you will know that it is accredited by our own Department of Higher Education and Training. It is also well managed, and well, I speak for my team, the team that works with me, and it is highly regarded index in the South, that's now in the Southern Hemisphere, and SciELO Citation Index forms part of the Clarivate Web of Knowledge search platform. Now note, that's not the Web of Knowledge, Web of Science's core collection, but this is a good way to get in. Starting point. So we started this collection in 2009, and I've been working on it for 12 years now. And we've managed to include 84 titles. And we are managed, well, SciELO South Africa is managed by the Academy of Science, and we are funded by the South African Department of Science and Innovation, and we endorsed and accredited by the South African Department of Higher Education and Training. So what editorial practices need to be in place to be included in? Oh my gosh, this is a typo. Sorry about that. SciELO, and it's like misspelling your own child's name. So that's quite a disgrace. First, it needs to be accredited by the Department of Higher Education and Training. And all the code of best practice, or most of it that Susan has been through, has given an indication of what they look at. But note they look mainly at technical aspects, like does it have an ISSN or SSN, and does it have an editorial board? And there are about 20 technical questions they answer, they require. And then you become part of the Department of Higher Education and Training's list. But ASSAf looks specifically at the content. Is this journal following best practice? Is this journal actually producing articles that are of value? Are these articles being cited all over the world? Or we've come across journals articles that have never been cited. So that is our role, to uplift the journals and lift the journal quality. That is now ASSAf, that's not SciELO specifically. Then we, secondly, you have to undergo a rigorous process of quality appraisal by ASSAf peer review panels that are put together in subject areas, and they evaluate the journal and the quality of the articles. They also investigate the reliability and the credibility of the journal, and if it offers innovative research by South Africans' top researchers. It's not just a whole lot of quotes from somebody, from various authors on the topic. It really has value. It's new information. And then they will recommend that a journal is included in SciELO South Africa, but then it's my job to have a look at if it actually adheres to the SciELO network criteria as well. So if you look at the criteria which is available at that URL, you will see, first of all, it needs to be South African. So for the many people listening now that are not in South Africa, please be in touch with us about the options available to you. And so this is then South Africa. So unfortunately, if you're in Kenya, and even if you have the best journal in Kenya, we unfortunately can't include you in SciELO South Africa as such. So we will have now received a positive evaluation from the relevant peer review panel. And we also look, does it publish open accessibly? Look, if you don't publish open accessibly, SciELO South Africa is not the place for you. And note that open accessible means no cost or embargo on full text articles, and that we as a SciELO team may harvest the article from the journal's website for publication on the SciELO South Africa platform. Also, the journal needs to have its own website with an archive of the journal's issues and articles. And then the next is the primary website of the journal needs to be open access. So one question I often get, and I'm just going to talk about it here, is why open access? Now, I love the story told by Abednego Kortli from Association of African Universities. And I heard this in a webinar, and I just thought this was such an excellent image. And he tells the story of the mother of a family making a meal at home, and then she takes the meal to the next village, and her own family gets none of it. And that is what often happens with our articles, is that they are taken up in commercial databases. And when our own families or our own citizens want to see these articles, they have to pay for them. And when they click on, they either say no access or first pay $20. Now that, of course, to us is a tremendous amount of money. So that's why ASSAf is we've often open policies. As Susan said, we make our slides available, etc. And we then say that this database is all about trying to circumvent this problem. So and the next one is you need to publish regularly, on time, and throughout the year. Now, if you publish 2 articles a year, is your journal actually a journal? You know, the question is debatable. If you haven't published for 2 years, but no, we say you need to be completely current. And look, I know last year and the year before there were problems with COVID. You know, archives were closed, libraries were closed, a lot of people were sick, etc., etc. And so there were some small leniencies, but now we're back to speed again. And if you look at the amount of articles we expect, that is our guideline for journals. Look, in some journals you will find there just is less. We had a journal called the African Natural History, just one, and sadly no longer funded. And they produced 3 or 4 articles a year, but they were excellent. And they were some of our most highly cited articles. So it really depends on the subject area. Now, for those who've not heard of it yet before, this is the future. You need to assign digital object identifiers to your original articles. And if you look at that structure of what a DOI is made up of, after the word org, there's a / and then that next little bit is the DOI prefix that you're using belongs to either your organization or to your university, and they pay for the DOIs that get deposited. And these DOIs create a tremendous amount of visibility for your article internationally. Just to give you an idea, the price of a DOI is $1. So now let's look at the next criteria. Because SciELO is part of a network and it's international, all articles have to have an English abstract as well and English keywords. So in South Africa, we have Afrikaans articles as well, and elsewhere in Africa, you may have French articles or other languages, but yet an article must always have an English abstract and English keywords. And this is because the metadata, this becomes part of the metadata, and it makes your article so much more findable internationally. And then, as Susan has said already, your affiliations are needed. Now, if you just write, it was John Smith and you work and UNISA, how is someone outside South Africa supposed to know that that's the University of South Africa in Pretoria, and that this author is actually in the field of theology or whatever? And then IDs is org IDs. This is something that will be covered in a separate webinar, but this is also a way for authors to keep their articles together. So on your web, if your journal's open access, on your web page, you should state what your journal's Creative Commons license is. So for example, CC BY 4.0. So 4.0 is the latest version, and on the right, you'll see CC BY and then little man or person. And then I looked up the definition, and if you look at it, the BY part stands that credit must be given to the creator, always. And secondly, but it also means you can share and adapt the article for further research. So getting to the last two then, you need to sign a publisher's agreement with ASSAf. And the next one is, of course, DOAJ is becoming more and more well known in editing circles. And in South Africa, for example, if your journal is on DOAJ, it's also accredited by the government. And you need to provide proof that you have at least started to make an effort. Now, what I like about DOAJ is they really have a look at, carefully go through the peer review process. How's it done? What type is done? And they make sure that all the information you're applying is in fact on your web page. So this also makes it easier for people to work out if a journal that they want to apply send an article to is good or not. And that's it from me, but you are very welcome to contact me, and we look forward to the question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Louise. It was excellent. And thank you, colleagues, for adding your questions to Q&A. We'll address them in about 15 minutes. Now I would like to invite Sue to talk about AJOL and journal evaluation framework, which is another example. And over to you, Sue.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. So pleased that so many interested and committed people could join us this afternoon. The gremlins have been at work on AJOL systems, but I think that if we are lucky, we can overcome this. So just to start out with, I would like to show you, I'm now screen sharing, that's great. Can't get rid of the items at the top of the page. African Journals Online, for those who aren't already familiar with us, has been working since 1998. It started out as a project in Oxford in the UK and was handed over to African management in 2005. We provide free hosting for African published peer-reviewed research journals, each of which are assessed, and we include all different types of journal publishing models. So we have 293 open access journals on the platform. We use open journal system software as a basis for the work that we do. Clearly, this is something that is of use to the world's researchers. Our primary focus, though, is to get content available and used by and respected by African researchers. So our kind of main developmental focus is to assist and mentor journals to constantly improve to the point that the content is recognized as being strong in order for African challenges to be addressed by African learning. The usage stats from the platform are obviously available, and our highest ever was 3.5 million downloads in October last year. So the site is very well used, and that is also from all over the world. It's not it's not just an African solution. What we eventually realized as part of this usage, and by the fact that some authors were beginning to use AJOL as part of their CV, the fact that they had an article published in a journal included by AJOL, we realized that we needed to address the notion of making more transparent the publishing practices that are being attained by the different journals we partner with. We have a huge range of different types of journals that we work with. Some are professionally published by, commercial publishing companies and have all of the fancy technological bells and whistles and expensive plagiarism checkers and so on. But the majority of the journals that we work with are society journals, research societies, or just smaller groups of experts who have gotten together to publish a journal. We call them standalone journals. And it's those types of journals that AJOL works very strongly to help mentor, because these are usually published by people who are experts in the field of the actual journal. They're not publishing experts at all. So by making quite basic mistakes, it can be possible for them to come across as being a low quality publication, simply because they're not aware of the publishing practices and standards that they need to make transparent and share the info that they are actually applying in terms of their quality control and their practices in order to be recognized as strong journals. And so we also wanted to showcase the journals that are doing fantastically and meeting any international set of standards of quality, but also provide a step-by-step guidance of how to improve for those journals that are just starting out, and in the form of a kind of a carrot process. So what we developed together with our partners overseas at INASP is something called the Journal Publishing Practices and Standards Framework. And I'm going to show you a brief video in a sec. But all of this JPPS, Journal Publishing Practices and Standards Framework, is available on this website called journalquality.info. And the criteria are all available on the website, and hopefully I will have time to go through them after the video. is screened. Can everybody hear me okay at the moment? Irina?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Just getting to the point of trying to navigate back to the meeting. Just going to stop screen sharing and start the video.
But first things first, what is the JPPS framework? There are quite a few acronyms ahead, beginning with JPPS, Journal, Publishing, Practices, and Standards. But where does this JPPS framework come from? It did not arrive fully formed. In fact, it was developed over years by ASSAf and AJOL to support the visibility and credibility of Southern research. But let's get past the other acronyms first. ASSAf is the International Network for Advancing Science and Policy, and they are based in Oxford, UK. AJOL, that's us, African Journals Online, based in Makanda, South Africa. The JPPS standards are based on international standards, but also integrate quite a lot of local knowledge. AJOL believes in African solutions for African problems. Therefore, using only international standards is ignoring the value of local knowledge. And for that reason, the JPPS framework combines local knowledge with international standards gleaned from working with independent journals, journal editors and researchers in African countries, and from other resource-constrained settings. But what are the resource-constrained settings? In fact, there are several journal online systems established by ASSAf and other low to middle income countries: Vietnam, Bangladesh, Central America, Mongolia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. Why did we need to develop the JPPS framework to begin with? The easiest way to explain this is to take a short detour into the world of maps, specifically the Mercator projection, which is the international standard for map projections. It distorts the size of regions further away from the equator, so we end up with this nonsense, which is that Greenland looks like it's the same size as Africa, when Africa is actually 14 times the size of Greenland. The following GIF shows the correct relative size of the continents and countries to one another, and you may be surprised because if you notice, Africa doesn't change size, but Europe and North America shrink considerably, and so does China. Surprising, right? Maybe not. There's also no special reason that the North is at the top and the Atlantic's in the middle, except that's the way it's always been shown. There's no reason we can't flip it, and that the Indian Ocean's at the middle, and Africa and Australia and South America are at the top. This all just goes to show that the way things are does not need to be the way they stay. How does this relate to the JPPS framework, I hear you ask, because you are busy and want me to get to the point. Well, because the North's domination of research means that there's an imbalance. Southern research is as valuable but isn't taken as seriously. We have all encountered this. ASSAf's mission is to support research-producing individuals and institutions in order to use their knowledge they produce to change lives, while AJOL is the world's largest online library of African-published peer-reviewed scholarly journals, so that African learning can be used for African development. Southern researchers are in the best position to address the South's challenges, and in fact, the world's challenges. Therefore, the South's researchers must be supported in their endeavors to publish their research. Currently, we're a little bit lacking. Further, they need to be supported in their efforts to make the research more discoverable. This is very important. Research we can't find, we can't use. What challenges do they face? Lack of support, infrastructural and financial. Lack of familiarity with international publishing standards. Underrepresentation in international indexes and rankings due to the above. And also the really irritating mistaken identification as predatory journals because of the lack of familiarity. These shortfalls have very negative impacts on research and development because research that can't be found can't be used. And policymakers and influencers don't have the data, it affects their decision making. So knowledge is, as we all know, power. Addressing the imbalance of research access and research quality across the North and South is therefore crucial to Southern development, and it is imperative that Southern journals be trusted as part of the regional and global scholarship environment. This, we feel, AJOL is a non-negotiable, and the JPPS framework is an element in our attempts to redress this global scholarly imbalance. How does the JPPS system help journals, though? Basically, all it does is fulfill three main purposes. Firstly, it guides journal editors in improving article publishing processes. Secondly, it assures readers and authors that the journal meets certain international standards. Thirdly, it acknowledges journals that have achieved widely recognized publishing standards. But there's always a but. What the JPPS system does not do is check the quality of research content. That is entirely the journal's prerogative. And one other thing, JPPS ratings are only available to journals that are applying for inclusion in or already in the AJOL system. JPPS ratings are only issued through an assessment done by AJOL. They're not generally available. There is no JPPS without AJOL. So be sure to apply, because without us, there is no JPPS rating for your journal. So this assessment that I keep talking about, where does it come from? What are the criteria and how do they work? The criteria are derived from several sources. Inclusion standards set by the international indexes such as Clarivate and COPE and DOAJ, academic publishing industry guidelines, as well as lived experiences of those in the context of journals in developing countries, and in AJOL's case, feedback from African editors. But the criteria work quite simply, despite all of the complicated machinery behind them. There are four main elements. The first one, with which you will hopefully become or are already familiar, is the assessment, then the report to the editor, and the display of the JPPS rating and inclusion on the official list. It looks faster than it is. I apologize if you are waiting, because everyone who applies to AJOL is automatically assessed as a prerequisite for being on AJOL. If you are already on AJOL, you will be reassessed from time to time, and it's the same process. You will receive a report, your new rating will be displayed, and you will be updated on the official list. Simple. There are 6 JPPS star ratings or tiers, as follows. There are a no-star rating, a new title rating, the inactive title rating, a 1-star, a 2-star, and a 3-star ratings. 1-star journals have been compliant with the basic criteria for 2 years. We will go over those in a moment. A 2-star title, which is compliant with additional JPPS criteria as well as the basic ones. And the 3-star journal, which meets all the criteria for 1 and 2 stars as well as other criteria for at least 3 years. The new title may be accepted for inclusion on the JOL if it's found to meet the basic criteria, but they will only be given a star rating after 2 years. Please alert AJOL when your 2 years is up. A no-star rating doesn't meet the basic requirements. These are usually legacy journals. Generally, if you have no stars, we will ask you to reapply. And the inactive title. We have quite a few of these. Sometimes journals stop publishing for various reasons. Once you're on the JOL, you're on the JOL though, but you will be listed as inactive. Let's take a look at the basic JPPS criteria. These are the criteria for a new journal rating on AJOL. They are as follows. The journal must be published from within Africa. The journal must publish original research, and it must have a clearly stated aim, focus, and scope. The about the journal information must include the title, the ISSN, the name of the publisher or publishing body, and the copyright statement. This is very important. All of these things are compulsory. There must also be a licensing statement, the details of the editor and an editorial board, and an accurate publishing frequency, i.e. how many issues per year. The journal must also provide clear and comprehensive author's instructions, types of manuscript, style guide, description of how to submit, and a functional contact email. And the front page of each article must include the title, the author's names, and the abstract or summary. All articles in the journal must relate to the focus and scope of the journal and have a complete bibliography. Also, please send AJOL PDFs timeously. Different JPPS ratings have different criteria. These are just the basic ones. Lastly, let's take a quick look at the JPPS site, which you can access at www.journalquality.info. We are going to look at AJOL's holding here, but the other JOLs also have their lists hosted here. You will note that I am going to scroll down and show quite a few of the journals already hosted on AJOL. You will further note that not all the journals which have been recently added are yet listed here. This site is updated periodically, and currently ajol.info is slightly ahead. So don't worry, if you have already completed your assessment and you are not listed here, you are still listed and your JPPS rating is live. Don't panic. But this is the JPPS site as opposed to the AJOL site with which you may be familiar. As you can see here, there are quite a few inactive titles. COVID has been unhelpful in this respect, but also quite a few one-star journals. 1 star is fairly simple to achieve, 2 stars a little bit harder, and 3 stars considerably harder. Let's search here by new ratings. As you see here, like I've said, all the new ones are not yet listed here. Some journals will also be reassessed, and then the rating will be updated on AJOL as well as on this site. So it is a constant process of improvement and updates.
So thanks very much for watching that, everybody. I'm going to take us back to the websites that I was showing you earlier. Apologies for the overlapping information. I hope that I can sort that out. AJOL is in the process of developing a series of small videos like this one about different aspects of our work. So it's still in the process of development. We're going to have it in French as well. So once that is available, I will provide it to Irina. You'll note that the journalquality.info website is actually also available in French as well as in Spanish. So then just to show you, there is more information about the criteria for each of the different tiers on the website. It is a summary. The actual assessment is 103 different criteria, and background information is checked. Active email addresses on the part of the journal are checked. The editorial board members' actual involvement are checked. There is a huge amount of work that goes into the assessments of each of these journals. And as you can see, you'll recognize many of them from the presentations, the excellent presentations by Susanne and Louise that have already been done. And basically, by the time a journal gets 2 stars for JPPS, they are meeting international publishing standards, and certainly by 3 stars, that would allow them to be accepted by any platform in the world, including the DOAJ. We did develop part of these criteria using the stronger Directory of Open Access Journals criteria, so that it does all hang together. So you can obviously see basic criteria for inclusion on the DOAJ, as well as the AJOL website. We also are a member of the Committee on Publication Ethics. They have an enormous amount of excellent free resources on their website, publicationethics.org. And they've recently set this one out, which is activities for a successful editorial office, again, with developing guidelines for authors and reviewers, developing processes and documenting processes for responding to ethical concerns. And importantly, again, this word transparency, actually sharing what those are, particularly if an open access journal charges fees of any kind, that information should be transparently shared on the website, along with all of their other policies, their editorial boards, and so on. So just to quickly, while we're talking about the matter of fees, keeping an open access journal going when no subscription payments are coming in, this website is put together as a bigger one, an open access directory of it's based in a wiki format. And it has a huge amount of resources and helpful items for this to assist open access journal publishers. This specific one is about the different types of revenue sources that are possible to explore for an open access journal. The open access journals that AJOL primarily works with, actually many of them operate completely cashlessly on the basis of in-kind support from the institutions, as well as volunteer effort. Ideally, though, journals should standalone, the smaller journals should try and access fundraising from their institutions or from elsewhere to be able to afford a journal manager, full-time journal manager, to assist with the administration and running of a journal. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it has been useful, and keep an eye out on the links that Arena is providing for the video once it is completely polished and in French as well.
Thank you so much, Sue. It was excellent, very useful. We have a lot of questions, and let me start with the Q&A, and then we'll take some questions from the chat as well, and I'll read them in the order they are listed in this Q&A box. So I'll start with Baraka's question. What is the difference between peer reviewers and editorial board members?
Shall I kick off, Mirina?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So what's the difference? So editorial board members are the members that actually assist the editor. And those members would then, they could do some peer review, but otherwise they assist the editor in day-to-day tasks and also decision-making in terms of the journals and some challenges and planning of the journal, for instance, which articles, once they've been accepted, should be published, perhaps if there's themed issues or special issues, what should they be, etc. Just to give you a sense of what the editorial board would do. What is a peer reviewer? A peer reviewer is an expert in a particular field that reviews a manuscript that have been submitted to a journal. So it's not to say that that manuscript will be accepted, it could be rejected, but it's soliciting expert input and reviews on a particular manuscript, whether it should be published or not. Thank you, Rina.
Thank you so much. Next question is from Benjamin. And it's a bit longish one. I'll read it, but you can also read it in the Q&A. The editor-in-chief of the Nigerian Agricultural Journal, published by the Agricultural Society of Nigeria since 1961, is usually appointed for 3 years and another 3 years, if need be, while other positions, president, VP, secretary, treasurer, financial secretary, etc., are by elections, 2 years each. In this case, the editor-in-chief position is for 6 years. How ethical is this based on your recommendation? This will guide us at the editorial board, or we need to amend our constitution to reflect good practice.
Thank you, Rina. I think I'll take that one as well. So I think we must just, I don't want this, a little bit of contradiction here. So the editor-in-chief of the journal is usually appointed for 3 years and another 3 years if need be, and that is fine. So it means that the contract is for 3 years and then there's a competitive process. Yes, you know, sometimes editors or people in general actually takes about 3 years just to adjust to the new job and to the journal and to get it on a particular track. So that's why we say then if appointed for another 3 years, that is okay. But just to keep the principle open that the editor needs to reapply perhaps for that position. But I think your policy and your practices are fine. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And the next question is from Satyabhati, and perhaps we should mention that we're not speaking about specific journals. We're talking about SciELO South Africa, which is a platform with many journals, and AJOL, which is also a platform with hundreds of journals. So I don't know how we could answer that question, but let's try, or maybe you could answer from your experience. What are the minimum and maximum possible charges, article processing charge, and how long does it take to review an article? How long will it take to publish an article? So I don't know if you can even generalize based on your journal practices, because this question is really very much journal specific.
Yes,
sorry, Susan.
No,
I'm just going to jump in briefly just to explain. Both SciELO and AJOL are not journal publishers ourselves. We are platforms that provide hosting and extra visibility online to these journals. So although we encourage them to have policies and to be transparent about the information that on the fees that they charge, we don't actually have control over that ourselves. It is up to each individual journal to decide their policies and their business model, and if they charge article processing fees or page charges, and how much those are, how much there might be. There is a huge range in terms of pricing of article processing charges. For example, Nature and Science, the big overseas, very, very famous journals, will charge something ridiculous like $11,000 for an article processing charge. Smaller journals that are merely doing cost recovery and aren't actually in it for any kind of commercial profit might only charge $50 in order to just to cover their basic costs. So massive range, and difficult to answer that one. Also a massive range in how long it takes to review an article and get it published. So yeah, it's impossible really to give averages for that one.
Thank you. I could perhaps just add from my DOAJ associate editor experience, if I see that a journal says that it takes them 3 days to review an article, that would be a red flag for me, because I don't think it's actually possible to review an article in such a short time frame. Then an interesting question from Warren. On the aspect of originality, how would you classify preprint archives? And is this practice not compromising the peer review process?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting question. And most journals are actually faced with that problem. So let me tell you what we did in the South African Journal of Science. Is we say, well, we will accept articles that has been posted in a preprint repository, but then they must submit all the reviews that manuscript have solicited. into our platform as well. So all those peer reviews are then considered with the 2 blinded peer reviews that we will request from 2 reviewers. So we do allow that. And one has to look very carefully. The repositories are very differently sort of managed. Some are really just repositories where unpeer-reviewed material are being posted. But then you get very well organized repositories. If we think about the African Academy of Sciences with their Open Science platform, where they post preprints, and there you'll see a range of actually peer review reports until such time that the author says, okay, this is now my final one. So they use the preprint repositories to shape their final article to be submitted then eventually to a particular journal. But yes, it really, we had to think very closely and clear about that one, because you do want to publish articles of a particular quality. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And the next question is from Delphine. Is a SciELO database only gathers journals published in English, or other languages represented too, such as French?
Yes, thanks for that question. No, it's any language, but you always need to provide an English abstract and the English titles, keywords as well.
Thanks. Next one is from Boniface. Why would some journals ask some authors to suggest reviewers to their own manuscripts? What are some advantages and disadvantages of doing so?
I just want to say, but they do. You find that often. It's actually sometimes a common practice to ask the author, especially if you're desperate, to please provide names of peer reviewers. They do. That's all I can say. But then why should you not do it? Because it actually signals a particular biasness towards the author and his research, etc. So what do you want? That's why the peer review system is there, is to have independent, objective review of your article. Because what is the end goal of the journal? Is to publish research of quality as well as good content without any biasness or any of those things in between. Thank you.
Can I jump in as well on that one? It is an interesting question, and it's one that comes up a lot in in the workshops that AJOL gives. What we advise journals who are already practicing asking authors for reviewer suggestions for their manuscripts is that they definitely do not use those suggested reviewers for the review of that particular manuscript, but rather add those reviewers to their database of reviewers, that they keep, that they can call on potentially for a different article by a different author at some other time. So we advise that is a policy, and that's the advantage. It's often very difficult for journals to find people in our busy lives who have the time and the expertise and the willingness to be able to review an article. So the advantages of doing that for a journal is you're adding to your database of reviewers that you can call on for a different manuscript at another time. The disadvantage is that the readers will likely assume that you are using those suggested reviewers from an author for the review process for that author's manuscript, and that's, as Suzanne says, that is definitely not ideal. So that is the clear disadvantage. So pros and cons.
Thanks a lot. Then I'll read two questions from Ado and from Joshua because they're a little bit similar. Does SciELO South Africa accept applications from journals in Nigeria? And another question, is a SciELO database only gathers journals published in South Africa? Do you consider journals from West Africa?
Yes, good question. Well, at this stage, we are funded by the South African government to disseminate and make visible South African journals. And yes, so the funding does come from us. And it's not, I just showed you this database that we have as an example for if you want to develop something similar in your own country. But I would suggest, you must remember that, and I saw another question, AJOL, DOAJ, SciELO South Africa, we all work in parallel. We all do very similar things, and the more exposure you have, the better. So if you can get onto all three, that's really great. But for people in countries not South Africa, and I'm sorry that I've used that and as an example and might have confused you, is to say, look at what you can do. And for those, in those cases, I would suggest if your journal's open access, go definitely get index in DOAJ. That gives you, it's very good to put that on your web page. And also AJOL, great service, great, they're doing great work. I would suggest that you rather go in that direction. And there are other platforms as well. So Son, would you like to add anything?
Yes, just want to strengthen what you've said. I mean, of course, the possibilities there to start looking at SciELO Africa maybe, but there I feel very strongly. You've got African Journals Online, which in essence almost promote exactly the same. There's nothing prohibiting you to put your full text online through AJOL. I think in the past we had the criticism, but you get a fruit salad of quality on the AJOL platform, but that have changed now. I think I really want to commend AJOL for putting this framework in place. And if you study that framework, you will see it speaks directly to what I've just, what I've addressed in my presentation. So kudos for AJOL definitely. And that already changes the ball game. So certainly, I don't think that SciELO is the beginning and the end, or there are other platforms, like you rightly said, like AJOL, for instance, to participate in as well.
Thanks a lot. Anna is asking, are there any costs to a journal for being in SciELO South Africa collection?
For us to publish or republish, we carry all the costs because it is covered by the government. Well, that is at this stage. Whether the government changes its policy, one never knows. But yes, we are confident. But you must remember, we are just dealing with the PDFs you send us. Everything up until that point is still the journal's responsibility.
Irina, can I just jump in here to say yes, we are funded by the Department of Science and Innovation, but this is a national asset, and this asset actually taps into a far broader framework which is envisaged for South Africa. We work very closely with the Department of Higher Education and Training. In the next year or so, a research output quality framework will be launched under the DHET. And we hope that the SciELO South Africa database will plug directly into that framework as being a preferred platform to publish on, considering all its checks and balances, its criteria, its evaluations, what we stand for, and the fact that we actually tap into a broader South collaborative effort as well. So I just want to emphasize this is a national asset as well, and it's being viewed and considered and driven and managed in that regard. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I'd also like to add, for the journals that make use of our DOIs, we also pay for the DOIs, and we pick up small errors in the PDFs, we give feedback to them, and we do all that at no cost to the journal.
Thank you. There is a question from Yitageso. What does it mean to get 1 star out of possible 3 rating for a journal? But that question was submitted before the video explained what a 1 star means. So I don't know if there is anything you could add, you, or what you showed was quite comprehensive anyway.
If you have any questions about what the specifics are of the star ratings, do have a look at the journalquality.info website. It is going up and down at the moment because of our technical gremlins, I'm afraid. So it might not be live right now, but all of the 1 stars in detail criteria are listed there. It means that that has been assessed, and a journal that is given that 1 star, you'll see next to its title on the AJOL website, you will see that 1 star displayed, and it has been assessed and found that it is meeting all of those criteria. Thanks.
Thanks. And perhaps you could take the next one. Do we have to pay to apply and become a COPE member?
As far as I know, yes. AJOL does pay an annual membership fee to be part of the committee on publication, or a member of the Committee of Publication Ethics. And that does allow us certain advantages, like we can present difficult quandaries when a journal is having an argument with an author, for example, and they can't come to an agreement, and we are then able to submit as a case study to a board of people who can then give an opinion, you know, and it's like an external kind of valid opinion that's coming from professionals in the field. So that's very useful for us. Individual journals, though, there are loads and loads and loads of free resources on that Committee on Publication Ethics website. So before you decide whether you want to go ahead and pay membership fees, just have a look at what is already there. You might find that it's all you need is already available without having to pay.
Thanks a lot. Then there is next question, and it's rather a difficult one, and none of us are members of editorial board, so I don't know, well, perhaps maybe Suzanne a little bit, but I don't know if we could answer that. What is your advice if, for an instance, a staff member is a visionary of a journal? How does one handle the renewal of the editor's position? Because it's very specific to the way journal operates, so I don't know if someone could comment about that.
So maybe I'm not reading the question correctly, but I think my answer remains the same. Is the visionary of a journal? How does one handle the? What does a visionary mean? The manager of a journal. Sorry, I'm just trying to. How does one handle the renewal of the editor's position? I think my answer remains the same. You know, one will have to build in some mechanisms where you can actually renew or not renew a contract of a person, and that should be on a competitive basis. Yes, because otherwise a journal's very much then a one-man sort of show, and it's driven under that sort of remit, and that's problematic for a journal. One must always remember what is your vision and your strategy with a particular journal, and then set up the management of your journal to actually support and to enhance that vision for your journal. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking at a chart. There is an interesting question from Linda about self-citation. There is a mention of self-citation being limited. How is this measured for the research to decide whether it's too much or enough of self-citation?
I can try again. Remember what I said right from the beginning is that research has to signal new research. I mean, you cannot keep on citing yourself, because then it's just a repetitive information that you're bringing through your article. So you have to look at other leaders in the field and other experts in the field to substantiate your new knowledge in your own article. So yes, there's not a number, but I just think it is problematic if you also look at the scienceometrics of things, and you look at Web of Science and you start doing bibliometrical analysis of articles. That's the first thing that you exclude, is self-citation. So self-citation is not adding any value to the visibility and the citability, and even in some cases, the indexability of your actual article.
Thank you. And we'll probably take the last question from a chat, because we're already over time. Apologies for that, sir. I just wanted to give an opportunity to everyone to hear the answers. So the last question is to Sue from Karina. For an online ISSN, a URL is required. Some organizations publish in-house journals with valuable subject matter content limited to own staff as sources, reviewed in-house, but for public consumption, open access. Some organizations find it easier to make those journals available via the website through non-permanent links, rather than go through the process of applying for the ISSN or developing a permanent page link on their website. Would AJOL be prepared to host that kind of information on their platform?
Thanks for the question, Corinne. We would have to talk in more detail about the situation. One of the things that would be a consideration is the fact that it's run by your own staff as authors and reviewed in-house. So we would have to kind of assess how that works. But just to say that we do have journals that are in a similar situation and kind of have a small part of the university website dedicated to their content and are on AJOL as well. But we do require an ISSN for a journal and an EISSN. It's one of the basic criteria that we have always required, so that you would have to go through the process of getting an ISSN and an EISS for if you're print only, or an EISSN, I'm afraid. Sorry, I'm trying to be succinct. But please feel free to email us, info@ajol.info.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I just want to add, and you also distinguish a predatory journal from a actual quality journal. You know, that's one of the points that's being raised when you participate in predatory or even unethical practices. Thank you.
And there was a question in the chat how to join LIBSENSE, and put in an email in the chat how you can be added to LIBSENSE mailing list. And thank you so much, Susan, Louise. That was excellent, very practical, exactly the way we planned it. And there was a good suggestion to perhaps focus more on business models. So let's see if we offer that webinar sometime later in March or April. Thanks a lot. I will email slides and recording to everyone who registered for this webinar, and it might take some time because it takes some time for recording to be generated on YouTube. So perhaps if not today, tomorrow, expect an email from me, and to visit LIBSENSE page, which I included, where we also include all links to slides and recording. Well, thank you so much again, and have a great rest of the day, and see you the next webinar, same time as today and next week. And we'll talk about copyright and licensing, and next week it will be in both languages, in English and French. But today you'll receive Suzanne's and Louise's slides in French as well. Thank you so much, and bye.
Thank you, Irina. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.